Yeah, I guess so. Maybe somebody else will show up. Yeah, they'll trickle in. Yeah. So, I'm Clay Jackson from Quest Software. Been doing database movement, database migrations for many years. It's kind of my specialty. Before I joined Quest 12 years ago, I was a DBA manager. A shop we had DB2, Oracle, SQL Server, Postgres, Essbase, just all sorts of different databases, and we're always moving data back and forth between them, and that's where I kind of got my start, looking at moving data around and migrating data from one system to another. So I'm going to talk about that today. That's my clicker going here. We'll talk a little bit about high-level trends in data, first of all, and what's going on. Hybrid cloud's here to stay, right? Larry announced it at Open World, or Cloud World, excuse me. Microsoft is pushing it. Now you can buy Oracle DB in Azure or in AWS, or pretty soon in Google. So lots of stuff out there. Lots of people running different clouds. You can even run Postgres in Oracle Cloud now. So not all your data is appropriate for cloud. I actually had a hospital administrator tell me not too long ago that they would never move their electronic medical records to the cloud because they didn't want that security issues or the issues of reliability and all those sorts of things. Now, you talk to Larry Ellison. They just announced a big EHR mechanism. They want to put everybody's EHR in the Oracle Cloud, of course. So that's going to happen, but there's still going to be reasons to keep data out of the cloud. The other thing that's happening is there's no single source of truth, right? You got data everywhere. That drives auditors crazy, by the way. The auditor comes in and says, okay, prove to me that this piece of data you got here and you reported on didn't get changed when you have it over here in your other system. Oh, it did. Well, okay, what's you reporting on? Which is real? Which is the truth? Regulation's increasing. We got PCI, if you're in Europe or overseas anywhere, we got GDPR. And there are lots of state and local laws. Washington State's probably going to pass a law this year to talk about data privacy and the right to be forgotten and things like that. At the same time, demand for data is increasing. You got analytics, reporting. Day-old data history is no good anymore. Used to be about 10 years ago. I worked for a consulting company before I came to Quest, and we did some consulting for a major car manufacturer that had a plant down in California. They had a big room full of data analysts, and we were doing work. And we told, okay, show up about 8:30. So we showed up about 8:15 and got in this big hangar full of maybe 1,000 desks in this room, and there were people sitting around drinking coffee, eating donuts, chatting, having a good time. And I said, oh, nobody working? And so the 8:30 came and went, and finally about 8:45, a bell rang. And they all ran to their desks and started working. And that bell was an indication from the IT department that yesterday's sales data was now available to their workstations, and they could go do analytics and play with sales data and do their analytics and make things work. So you could do forecasting and things like that. Now, today that's not going to cut it, right? You need data that's up to date and accurate. Day-old data might as well be history. It's really no good for anything. That's good for some things, but not really what you need. Next thing you got to worry about is where is your data, right? 175 petabytes by 2025. That's 61% annual growth rate. And it's not stopping, right? Think about all the data your phone is generating as you walk down the street and you're using your phone or getting location data or doing anything you want to do with your phone. 50% of the data is going to be in data centers and 49% is going to be in public cloud. That's probably changing. It's probably more like 60-40 now, but lots of data in the cloud, but still lots of data in data centers. DB engines, Oracle's still number one, but they're falling pretty rapidly. MySQL, which was number two, is down 97.44 points in this DB engine ranking. Microsoft SQL Server is down 111.61. The only one that's growing really is Postgres. Postgres is surging, and that number is probably low. We see more Postgres customers. Every time I go talk to a customer now, somebody mentions Postgres. What can you do for Postgres? How can you help me out for Postgres? That's what we're here today to talk about, so we'll do that. Okay, so why migrate? Why go to Postgres from Oracle? You're perfectly happy in Oracle. You got the red stack. You got DBAs that understand it. Sales guys may be after you a little bit. You may be paying a lot of money, but Typically what's going to happen is some chief officer is going to say so. CEO, CIO, CTO is going to say, well, we're paying Oracle too much. And we're also locked in. We want to avoid that vendor lock-in, so we're going to migrate. You might also be building new applications. We had one company we worked with, a medical research firm, a research company attached to a big university, and they collected medical data for an entire state and consolidated and then spread the data back out to the different universities so they could do analytics and figure out treatment plans and what treatments work, what treatments didn't, and so on. They also work with a bunch of big pharmaceutical companies. Well, COVID hit, and now all of a sudden everybody is querying their database and trying to figure out what to do about COVID. How do we treat COVID? They were getting queries, their query volume jumped something like 900% in 3 months. And they said, oh my goodness, what do we do about this? Well, we spin up another Oracle instance, do that, but that's just another Oracle instance. It's going to cost us a lot of money. It's going to be Oracle. We're still going to have to deal with it. So they said, well, let's see if we can do this Postgres thing. So they stood up an interest in Postgres and came to us, and one of our tools will help move data from Oracle to Postgres. We set that up, got them working on that, and they're using that now. They offloaded all their COVID-related things into the Postgres database, doing the queries out of that rather than in the Oracle database. So that's one of the things you can do. Next thing you want to do is you want to look and see is it going to be cloud or on-prem, right? You've really got kind of limited choices still. You know, big cloud providers are out there. You can buy services from little cloud providers, but they're in turn reselling the big cloud providers. So you're going to wind up spending more money, and you're still going to be subject to cloud issues and cloud things, and you're also going to look at higher costs. We had one company not too long ago that said they want to move everything to cloud, and they did. They moved all their operations from on-prem into a cloud environment. It happened to be AWS, and they got everything all set up and ran it. Predicted they were paying about $2.5–3 million a month for their on-prem data center. They got their first cloud bill, it was $8 million. And needless to say, that changed real quick. They pulled a lot of stuff back on-prem, cut down on a lot of things, made sure the developers weren't leaving machines on all night and so on. But that can happen with the cloud if you're not careful, because it's just so easy to leave a machine on overnight or leave storage out there you don't need, keep storage you don't need. Speaking about storage, one of the things you might want to be aware of is that, you know, data's got a life cycle, right? You create it, you use it, it ages, and then you better destroy it. A company I worked for a while back didn't have a data retention plan, data retention policy. They had email going back 20 years on tape and in various modes of storage that they had. Somebody sued them, and one of the suits was, show me all the email related to this particular transaction that happened 8 years ago. And the transaction was something that actually started 15 years ago. So, and then they also, the plaintiff also said, and prove to me that you've shown me all the email. So some poor guy in the IT department had to go out and find 20-year-old tapes and extract email records out of the email logs out of those 20-year-old tapes, get them into some sort of readable format, and then read through them and scan through them and find all the documents that had to do that. When they took longer than the judge wanted, wound up finding them. It cost them several $1 million to get that taken care of. So the key there is if you have a data retention policy that says, okay, after 6 years or however many years we destroy our data, and you can prove that you destroyed it. Somebody comes in and does discovery, and you say, okay, yeah, sure, fine, here's the last 6 years. Oh, we don't have anything beyond that because we didn't have to keep it. There's no law that says we have to keep it. There's nothing, you know, nothing under lawsuit or anything, so we didn't keep it. Sorry. And as long as you can prove that, then you don't have to worry about it. Now, if you make that statement to a judge and can't prove it, then you're in more trouble yet. So, but be careful about that. Make sure you keep track of your data retention and that you're doing a great thing with data retention. Yes. Yeah. Well, the company's going to decide in some cases, but in some cases it's going to be regulatory, right? For example, if you're a bank and you're doing mortgages, right, you have to keep the original mortgage application in some form for the life of the loan. 30 years, 45 years. If you're in Japan, you know, doing 100-year loans now. Can you imagine keeping a record around for 100 years of the mortgage application? I know another case where a company manufactures engines for airplanes. turbojet engines, jet engines. They have to keep track of every bolt and every nut and every washer and every component that goes into every engine they've got that's still flying. One of the engines they make is one that happens to be in the C-130, which is a military transport aircraft. Some of those are 40 years old. The airplane's been around for 40 years. So they've got a database that has that tracked all the way through, and every time an engine gets under overhaul, they get reported back on it. You know, I replaced this part with this part, I did that. They have to keep that because if there's an accident and something happens, they want to know, you know, what part failed, where it was on that engine, and what happened. So, yeah, you know, and that's a regulation. That's a federal aviation regulation that governs that. So there's some cases where it's, you know, mandated, but there are other cases where, you know, you can decide. You say, well, you know, nobody's going to want old email more than 6 years anyway, so why keep it around? Hybrid cloud is great where you can do it. You know, if you're doing interconnect between clouds, between Oracle, for example, and Microsoft, that only happens in certain locations and certain data centers. So you get limited locations, and it's going to be expensive. High-speed networks are pretty expensive. So, yeah, hybrid cloud is great. You want to do the Exadata in Microsoft Data Center, Oracle Cloud in Azure. That starts at $1 million list. So if you want to do that, you know, you gotta pay the piper. So when you get things shaken up, you want to do something new, right? Create something new. So now we get an elephant in the room, right? Postgres is not Oracle. You just heard about that in the last presentation, talking about differences in correlation and some of those things. Well, there's a lot more differences. First thing you got to worry about is what versions of Postgres you're going to get. You got the Community Edition, which is open source. That's great. All editions of Postgres are open source because they're all derived from the open source edition. But then you got multiple support options. Some of the ones are listed there. In addition to that, there's Fujitsu, a bunch of other companies. I was at Postgres conference in New York this last spring, and there was a company from Turkey there, the Turkish defense company, that was actually had a version of Postgres. It was secure, and they met all sorts of C3 standards. So you got a lot of different vendors. Every cloud vendor's got their own version of Postgres, including Oracle. Oracle's got a version of Postgres that they've actually forked and added some features to that was so it worked better in their cloud. And you know, you can do that, but you need to worry about it. Now you're locked into the vendor, right? You want to move from one vendor to another. You're locked into that, and you're locked into different versions. There's an article in the latest PG mailing list, PG list, last couple of days about somebody using a feature that was deprecated in Postgres 12, right? They're up, and now we're up on what, 17, but they're trying to figure out, okay, how can I use this feature that was deprecated in 12? So you got to worry about those things along the lines too. And without a real vendor or somebody to support it, you're kind of at the mercy of the Postgres community, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It can be very good and it can be very bad. So which Postgres are you going to use, right? Community Edition's great. It's common denominator. You're always going to get the things that are tested best and out there and everybody's using. Again, with enough eyes, all bugs are shallow. But there's no SLA for support. You put mission critical data in a Community Edition Postgres and run into a problem, you've got nobody to come back to but yourself. You're on your own. Yeah, you can go to lists, you can go to all sorts of things. You can maybe buy support from EDB or have some consultant come in, but it's basically up to you as a DBA or a DBA manager to get that problem solved. You don't have somebody like Oracle or Microsoft or one of the cloud vendors to go back to and say, hey, help me out, get me through this problem, get me over this problem. Commercial vendors, that's great. Again, EDB, PG Edge, Crunchy Data, Fujitsu. Pick one. They're all about the same. They all have about the same. Percona's another one. They're here. I should probably mention them. Cloud variants, that's great. Lots of them are database as a service. That's fine if you can put up with that. They're going to be locked down. They're also going to be locked into a specific version. When they upgrade, you upgrade too. And if you're 800 Flowers, you don't want to have your cloud vendor telling you that, oh, I'm going to do a database upgrade the week before Mother's Day. That's actually happened. 800 Flowers is one of our customers. They had that happen. That's one of the reasons they're not moving to the cloud, because they need to control specifically when they want to update, because 2 weeks before Mother's Day is 90% of their business. So they just can't have that. They can't do that. Okay, open source. It's free as in free speech, right? It's not free as in free beer. You're not going to get something for nothing. You have to pay for it one way or another, either have the staff to support it or pay for the support you need, and you're going to get that support. Extensions can get problematic. You get an extension from somebody, and then that somebody decides, oh, I don't want to work on that anymore because it's open source. You know, developer says, oh, I got another job over here working on this other extension, so I'm going to drop this extension. Now you've got something you're using in production that nobody's supporting anymore. There's no code development, no work on. I've had that happen too. And all the vendors are different. They can be different. They have different levels of support, different things you can do. So what's different? Just about everything. Storage is different, the way they store data. Toast versus large objects in Oracle, that's one thing. Postgres is kind of cool, actually. They implemented a lot of what the Oracle DBAs do on their own, or what Oracle's done now with offline lob storage or secure files and things like that. Postgres implemented that first. But it's different. Concurrency control, MVCC, is very different from Oracle. It's very different from SQL Server. You talk to SQL Server DBAs, you run the conference here, everybody's talking about deadlocks, right? They're always getting deadlocks, they're always getting locking, because SQL Server uses read locking. They do read locking if they need to for concurrency control. Postgres doesn't do that. They use the dead tuples and keep things in there, and they do a bunch of other opportunistic things. Not as good as Oracle, but Oracle's got the patent on what Oracle did. Bob Miner was a genius 30 years ago when he invented that Oracle's MVCC. Nobody's touched it since, because they can't. It's all still under patent. And you got vacuum to worry about, and XID wraps. Anybody ever seen an XID wrap? It's not pretty. You basically kiss your database goodbye. I've done it in labs just because I want to see what would happen. I wanted to see what would happen. Now, it takes a very busy database to do it, because it's something like 30 million or something like that. I mean, it's huge, but it can happen. And I've seen stories on the Postgres lists about it happening. So you got to be careful about that. It's not going to happen in Oracle, of course, because you don't have to worry about that. SQL's different. ANSI versus SQL Plus. SQL Plus is actually very different from ANSI. SQL Plus, you almost never see left joins because it defaults to left join, and a lot of the other things is going to default to is right join, or you have to specify what kind of join you want to do. Extensions can be problematic. Again, we talked about that. PL SQL versus PLPG SQL. Yeah, they're great. They're procedural languages. They're out there. EDB's got very close to PL SQL with Oracle, but it's still not 100%. And it gets better. But Community Edition, you're going to be stuck with an older version of that. And then you've also still got support. And as the last speaker just talked about, you got correlation issues to worry about. The healthcare company I talked about a little while ago, one of the things they had to do was keep clinical notes as part of their data. So they had these big long blobs, character lobs, that they had as fields that contained Word documents, right? So somebody would upload a Word document, they type a note, a clinical note, and it would pop out into Word out of their EMR system, and then they'd upload that into this database. Well, Word's got, pretty good character sets. They've got extended character sets. They've got things that aren't in C or in UTF-8. They're not in, a lot of them are in UTF-8, but they're not in the C collation. They got the previous speaker just talked about. Well, somebody had put in a 1/2 symbol, 1/2, right? They converted, Word converted that to the character 1/2, which is way above ASCII. It's not in the C collation. It's in UTF-8, but it's not in the C collation. That hit their Postgres database from out of Oracle, and Postgres said, wait a minute, I can't store that. I don't know what that character is. And it stopped. So we had to go back and figure out how to work around that. And we figured out the collation thing and set the collation right, and then everybody was happy. But that's the kind of thing you can run into, and that's the kind of thing that can stop you dead in your tracks if you're doing a conversion or a migration or something like that. So you got to be real careful about that, doing those. Okay, this is all about data. We're talking really more about data today than about anything else. So what data you're going to look at and what data you're going to migrate depends on the usage, right? So the first thing we always say is, and I've heard a couple of speakers here today talk about the same thing, model your data before you move it. If you don't know what your data is, you're not going to be able to move it successfully. If you don't know who's using your data, if you don't know how it's laid out, you don't know what the table structures are, you don't know those things, you're going to have a real hard time moving it. If you just have some schema reader that goes out and reads a schema, translates it from Oracle to Postgres, and then tries to move it, that's not going to work. I guarantee you, you'll have problems, or you'll have at least some problems there. So model your data before you move it. Logical model is better than a physical model. At least get a physical model. At least use some tool that's got a physical model. There's another presentation earlier today about Data Dwarf. You can look that up in the presentation slots and talk about that. It's an open source monitoring tool. Quest has Irwin. We've got some monitoring tools and other modeling tools out there. So, model your data. Get your data. Get a data governance program. It's a good excuse to get a data governance program and get something going there when you do it, when you want to do a conversion, you want to migrate, because that's going to help you understand a lot of different things about your data. Logical is better than physical, because now you're looking at the uses of the data and who's using it. You're going to find out who your data stewards are, who owns data, who's going to come screaming at you when the data is not right. You get it in your new system and they can't get it, or it's not right, or it's not, not collated right, or whatever. Who's going to be yelling at you? Is it the CIO, or is it just some accounting person that you can fix real quickly, or that you don't need to worry about until the next quarter close or something? Semantic mapping is even better. You want to understand what the data is, what the data means. One of the things a lot of people run into problems with, when it's a large bank we ran into, is what's a customer? Is a customer the business that has a business account, or is it the individual that has an individual checking account? And oh, by the way, if somebody's got an individual checking account and they happen to be a drug dealer, and they also have a business account, and they're using that business account and the individual account to transfer money back and forth and launder money and hold it, how are you going to figure that out if you don't know who those are? You don't know the relationships between those two entities. And that's something that now is required by law, actually. You have to have that information if you're a bank. You have to know that and scan those transactions and make sure that that's required by law. So the only way you're going to find that out is if you understand your data and you understand who the semantic mapping. Now, the problem is semantic mapping is hard, right? Because, you go to California, for example, and in California, by law, there are, I think it used to be 5, it's probably 6 or 7 now, different categories for secular orientation. And anybody who does anything financial or anything with a citizen of the state of California that requires secular orientation for whatever reason, and usually it's a minority reporting thing, they have to keep those, and they have to keep it in those 5 or 6 or 7 different categories. So if you're working on a system that only has, M and F as categories, how are you going to store that? How are you going to store that additional information? How are you going to use that information? If you move data around, you move into California, build a subsidiary, get a subsidiary in California, build a database that's going to be used by somebody in California. You have to take those things into consideration. Data types are different. Dates are different. We just had a big conversion. Somebody's converting an Oracle database to SQL Server and then on to Postgres after that, but converting a SQL Server first. Problem is Oracle timestamps are granular down to the millisecond. SQL Server timestamps are only granular down to the 10th of a second. They were using a timestamp as a key. So now all of a sudden they go into SQL Server and they start piling this data into SQL Server and they're getting invalid, duplicate key violations. What do you do? How do you fix that? You need to know about that and figure it out. If you've done your data modeling, you're going to find that out and you're going to figure that out before you get there. Numbers are different. Number ranges are different. SQL Server, for example, you store a date, no dates before BC. 1 AD is the first, 0 AD is the first date you can store in SQL Server. Want to go back prior to that? No way. In 4713 BC, they changed that happens to be 0 in the Julian calendar. So, and the exact date where that happened, the exact number of days prior to 0 AD where that happened is a subject to debate. It's about 100 years different. So Oracle deals with that. Oracle says, okay, dates between 4712 and 4713 BC are going to be off, and they're going to be, this is how we're going to deal with it. They document that. Postgres just says, nope, no dates prior to 4713. There was actually a question on the Postgres list a couple weeks ago about that. Somebody doing archaeological work and doing geophysical work wanted dates prior to 4713. How do you do that in Postgres? Well, yeah, he had to invent his own type. He had to write his own type to do that. So Those are the kind of things you have to look out for and watch for. Large objects, again, are going to be different. Blobs, clobs, they get stored differently. There may be subtle differences. Postgres doesn't have by default the same stuff that Oracle does with secure file lobs. You do encryption and TDE, but that requires an extension and some other things, or a later version of Postgres, you need to worry about those. So those are going to be different too. How's the data used? OTP versus batch. That's going to be a big difference. Going to make a difference in the way you tune your database and how you set your database up. Are you going to spread your databases and your tables out over multiple shards and multiple instances of Postgres? Maybe you can have a bunch of read-only instances out there with replication, or maybe you need a bunch of read-write instances with replication and conflict resolution. You want to keep your data close to the user, right? We have working with a customer that's got an office in London and an office in Singapore and an office in San Jose. They said, oh, we're going to consolidate all our data in a data center in Singapore. Well, that worked for about 2 weeks because people in San Jose were now saying, hey, it's taking us 5 minutes to get our data out of Singapore and over here into San Jose because we're creating these big data sets. And, speed of light's not just a good idea, it's the law, right? You can't move data any faster than even over an overseas cable or fiber optic cable. You can't move data faster than the speed of light. And you're trying to move big data sets. It's just not going to happen. So they had to recant, and they had to, we'll put some of the data in San Jose. Now you've got a source of truth problem, right? This data in San Jose, the source of truth, or the data in Singapore, the source of truth. Multi-master with master data. Master data is going to be where? Who's going to keep up the master data and make sure it's kept up in both places? So now you've got a database replication problem. You've got to replicate data between the two systems. And oh, by the way, one's Oracle and one's Postgres. How are you going to do that? So need to worry about that as well. Operational versus analytics. Again, same thing. We're seeing a lot of people these days that are doing their ERP databases and big Oracle databases with OBIE in them. I want to move that stuff to Power BI. Power BI's got it all over Oracle for analytics, right? That's just my personal opinion, but I think most people share that. So how do you do that? You want to get your Oracle data out of Oracle into Azure, or out of the Oracle Cloud into the Azure Cloud for Power BI. How are you going to do that? How are you going to make sure that that data moves and stays the same, and you keep the same source of truth? And when the auditors come and they say, well, prove to us that the data you're using for your analytics and for your sales forecasting is the same data that you actually got out of your sales system, which is still over here in Oracle. So how are you going to worry about that? Again, you don't want to pay for what you need. Just make sure that you're not spending money you don't need. You want to use your semantic model. That's your semantic model is going to come in real handy, particularly if you're looking at users, right? Where are the users located? If I want fast response time, I'm going to keep my data in the same place that the users are. And of course, speed costs money. So the faster you go and the more you go, the bigger your systems are, the more money you're going to spend either in cloud or in on-prem, no matter how you do it. The network speed, everything you do, speed costs money. And you want to consider HA and DR and replication. A lot of places now, DR is actually mandated and required. A couple years ago, in fact, we still see people who don't have DR plans. What happens if your data center has a fire? The company I worked for, before I came to Quest, we had that happen. We had a fire in our data center, and nobody had expected that. Oh, well, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We had to wind up renting space and very expensive office space and some other places and scrambling around to get things done because we didn't really have a good DR plan. We had backups. We could restore the backups. We didn't have a good DR plan. And then where are you going to put the people? You got a bunch of order takers on the first floor of your data center. The data center is now burned out. Where are you going to put the people who are doing the order taking and the order inventory and all those things, in addition to just the data center itself? So you want to make sure you consider that. Yeah. Disaster recovery. And HA, high availability. And they're different. High availability is all about, I don't want my system to go down for more than so many seconds or minutes at a time, or not at all. I've worked on some systems where, downtime is impermissible, right? You get into some of the telco systems, like cellular systems. If those go down, people can't make phone calls, right? So it's very, very, very costly and very expensive when that happens. So you really want to build your systems to make sure that that doesn't happen. That's high availability. Disaster recovery, so HA is really all about hardware and redundancy and doing all those things. Disaster recovery, on the other hand, is what happens if my data center is inaccessible or my machine is inaccessible for a week or some long period of time, or what's happened. What happens if we really had a disaster? And that's all about planning and about manuals and documentation and contracts and other things you need to take into consideration. So they're similar but different. And replication is a way you can solve both those problems. If you do the replication right, you can make copies of your data. You can keep it in two places, keep one for HA, a local copy, and keep another copy remote for disaster recovery. So, Seattle sits on an earthquake zone, right? So, the earthquake, it's not a question of if it's going to happen, but when it's going to happen. It's going to be a big earthquake in Seattle. You got a data center in Seattle and a data center in Kent or a data center in Vancouver, say, they're probably going to be affected by the same thing. So you really want to move your DDR data center to someplace like Texas or someplace like that. Company I worked for here in Seattle before I moved to Quest had a data center here in Seattle and a data center in Dallas for just that reason. And of course, Dallas gets ice storms and power outages and things like that, so we had it the other way around. And we were a financial company, so we had to prove to our regulators that we could switch between Seattle and Dallas. Every quarter, we'd come in the middle of the night and switch our systems from Seattle to Dallas. And now with Seattle's the main system and Dallas is the backup, and we're replicating data between Seattle and Dallas, and then next quarter we switch it back and go the other way. We look at our regulators and say, see, we can do that. And they said, oh yeah, okay, great, you can do it. If you don't say that, then they're gonna be after you and say, hey, prove that. Prove it to us. So who uses your data? Again, users, semantic model. Customers versus accountants, right? If the accountant doesn't get the data for a couple of extra hours, yeah, you're gonna pay him some overtime. It might be delay in reporting, and there might be some fines associated with that if it's public reporting, but it's not gonna be that bad, right? If you're Amazon and a data center goes down, customers can't place orders through Amazon, that's costing how many millions of dollars a minute? How many billions of dollars a minute? That's a lot different. Your customers are much more important usually than your internal folks. Operations versus analysis. Again, the example I used earlier, the car manufacturer, a day, okay, that's not so bad if you're doing analytics. If you're doing operations, you need to know how many cars you've sold or where the cars are right now, where are those cars that you're going to have to sell tomorrow. You need that data in real time. You're a trucking company, you need to keep track of your data in real time. That's how FedEx made their billions, right? They figured out, Fred Smith figured out that they weren't really interested in the packages. They were interested in the location of the packages and where the packages were and where they were moving and when they were going to be where they were supposed to be. Now, of course, you can't lose the package, so that's part of it, but really the thing they were really in the information business. And Fred Smith figured that out and did that. And that's how FedEx got its start and why they're as big as they are now. So timing's important. Do you really need real-time access? You're doing some things, yeah, you do. You do need real-time access. Again, order taking or drug administration, real-time access to medical records. You're storing all your medical records on a computer system, and the computer goes down. How the doctor's going to figure out what medication they need to give you or what's going on. And Larry Ellison's got some stories about that. So where's the data? Is it a single cloud? Is it one cloud vendor? Maybe it's the multiple cloud vendors. Maybe you got your Oracle stuff in Oracle Cloud. You got your BI and your analytics in Microsoft Azure. So how are you going to get the data between the two of them? What are you going to do there? Maybe it's on-premise. Or maybe it's all of the above. Maybe you got some data on-premise, some data in one cloud, some data in another cloud. We're seeing that more and more. That's going to be the coming trend these days. Is going to be data's everywhere, right? So you got to figure that out, and you have to make sure you're tracking it. Again, that's where your data modeling comes in. The semantic model and the logical model are going to tell you those things. They're going to tell you where the data is. You find it, you can move it, you can manage it, you can deal with it. And what about the application, right? We've been talking about data a lot. That's great. Data's still the key. Who uses data, where's the data? But there's code. There's SQL, SQL+, PL SQL, maybe some Java. If it's Java, you might be a little lucky. You might have to pay Oracle some license fees, but you might be lucky on Java, right? Because Java's write once, execute anywhere. That's great. But any of these other languages, you're going to have to do some sort of code conversion. And if you've got 1 million lines of code and EDB claims 95% compatibility between Oracle and Postgres, right? So PL SQL, PL/SQL and EDB's PL/SQL is 95% compatible, 95% you don't have to touch. That's still 500,000 or 5,000 lines of code you have to change. So, you know, and an application these days can easily be over 1 million lines of code, and you might not even know where all that code is. You know, what about the analysts and the people that have written PL/SQL or PGPL/SQL routines that are running on their desktops or running on their systems that IT doesn't know about? You move to Postgres from Oracle, and oh, they got to rewrite that. Or the other thing that we see happening now is move from on-prem Oracle into Oracle Fusion for ERP, right? Well, that's great, except Oracle Fusion, you can't get the data back out again. You can't query it with anything except Oracle tools. So how do you get out the data? Right here in Washington State, there was a company that did that. The CIO came in and made a deal with Oracle, and a new CIO came in and made a deal with Oracle. They moved their HR application from Oracle on-prem to Oracle Fusion. 100 Toad reports stopped working because they couldn't get at the data anymore. They had to go back and figure out how to get at that data. Now, Quest has since modified Toad so Toad can talk to Fusion, but that took us a while and took them a while, and so you need to worry about those kind of things. Again, Postgres, you know, you're using some sort of Oracle proprietary tool to get at your SQL developer or Toad or DBbeaver or some other product to get at your data in Oracle. How are you going to get at that data if you move it to Postgres? You need to figure that out ahead of time and work about it. It's going to be much more difficult than data. We had one company working with us, and they came and said, yeah, we want to move our data to the database Postgres. Okay, so we helped them move the data in the database. And they said, okay, we'll be back in about a year because we think that's how long it's going to take us to move the application, get the code right in the application. They did. They came back in a year, and they said, yeah, okay, we're ready now. So we went and we did what we needed to do. But that's the kind of thing you're going to run into. And if you don't plan for that, again, you're going to wind up with a disaster on your hands. We had another company that came to us, and they said, new CIO said, we're going to move everything off Oracle by the end of 2021. And this was, you know, 2020, early 2020. End of 2021, we got to be off of Oracle. And we showed them one of our products that moves data and talked about that. And we talked about it with them and worked with them. They said, yeah, okay, we'll go back and talk about that. We'll be back to you. We'll get back to you. Didn't hear from them again. We'd keep pinging them. They'd say, oh, yeah, we're working on it. End of 21, they came back and they said, well, old CIO got fired. We never did move completely off of Oracle. We got some new stuff in Postgres, but the old stuff's still in Oracle. And now we need to just move the data back and forth and keep it in sync between the two databases because we know we're never going to get off of Oracle, or getting off of Oracle is a 10-year plan. So again, that's the kind of thing that can happen. Look to do a phased migration if you can. If you can do it in one piece, that's great, but that's a big bang if it doesn't work. What do you do? Go back? It's much easier to do a phased migration. You get a bunch of data in a database, you get hundreds of applications accessing it, move one or two at a time. Move them piece by piece if you can. Again, replication tools can come in handy to help you do that. Use tools, right? Lots of tools out there. Replication tools will help you move the data, and then you can take your time with the code. Again, move small pieces of code at a time. Ora2PG is great for translating both schemas and code, and data and code. You can do that. We've got a product called Toad that does that. Toad Data Studio will do that. Say? Ora2PG is a public domain, open source code converter, basically. Well, it's a database converter. You feed it an Oracle database, and it'll attempt to convert the PL/SQL and functions, procedures, and also the schema. So convert the schema, and it'll tell you what it can't convert. And it's publicly available. It's pretty good. I've seen it do small applications. I've seen it do 100%. Larger applications, I've seen it do 50%. No, just Oracle 2PG, Postgres. There's some other tools out there that'll do other databases to Oracle. Toad Data Studio, for example, will do all sorts of different databases to Oracle or to Postgres or vice versa. So come see us in the Quest booth if you want to talk about Toad and Toad Data Studio. We'll show you all about that and talk to you about that. So possibilities are endless, right? You can do all sorts of things if you just take the time and think through it and look at it and figure out what you're going to be doing. So conclude with a little bit of a reality check here. Migration is not a destination, right? You're not going to do a migration and be done. It's not going to be over anytime soon. It's a journey. The old P's, proper planning prevents poor performance. Make sure you plan, then plan again, then revise your plan, then plan again. You really want your migration to be anticlimactic, right? You say, oh yeah, we planned for that. Okay, we got that here in the plan, we got this in the plan, we got that in the plan. Oh yeah, we're going to do this 3 times because the first 2 times we know we're going to fail. Things like that. It's all about the data, right? Data is the most important part. That really is the key to the whole thing, because you don't have the data, you don't have anything. But code is also very critical. Use the data where you can. You need to use the data to figure out where your code is and figure out what code you want to migrate and what you have to do first. And again, 90% of 100,000 lines of code is still 10,000 lines of code you have to modify. So you want to watch that and figure out how to make sure that's going to happen and make sure your conversion tool is going to do the right thing. Again, Ora2BG gets anywhere from 50 to 100%. And EDB, you can ask the EDB guys. I think they're here. I know Bruce Momdian and a couple of people here from EDB, and they'll tell you, oh yeah, we'll get 95% sometimes. So a lot of times they do that. A lot of times they don't. And Postgres may be open source, but it's not free. You're going to have to support it one way or another. You have to either have DBAs, or you're going to be buying it from some company or buying support from some company, or you're going to have to make sure that you've got some other way to support it, consultants or whatever you want to do. So, and that's it. Thank you for coming. Any questions? I wouldn't say so. It's different. I wouldn't say it's any simpler. Same problems. Same problems. Timestamp granularity, dates, sizes of objects. Different things. And again, that's where modeling comes in. We did a conversion one time from Oracle to SQL Server, and in Oracle, the field that they were converting, one of the fields they were converting was a number 9,2, right? 2 places the right decimal point. DBA looked at us and said, I know that field. That field's never going to be anything but an integer. He made an integer in SQL Server. Sure enough, the first day after they did the conversion, somebody put 5.8 in that field, got to SQL Server, and they said, wow, wait a minute, you can't put that in the database. So, you really got to make sure you know what you're doing. Model it. Model your data before you move it. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Code is important too. You got to get both. Got to hit them both. All right. Well, thank you all very much. Let's see. I'm just going to do this.